Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a refreshing lunch break and found some time to connect with a few other summit attendees on our platform. My name is Jennifer Vandervalk. I'm the board's Vice President of Communications and Public Affairs, and I'm glad that I get to help you shake off the post-lunch slump or embrace that afternoon energy and welcome you to the second half of our summit. This morning, we heard a lot of big ideas when it comes to transportation and what our region needs to effectively move more people and goods. Often those good ideas come with the need to build something new, a road, bridge, subway, or other infrastructure project. And that's where things can get tricky. To complete the volume of projects that our region needs at the pace that our growth demands, we have to address the common roadblocks that make building infrastructure so time-consuming and costly. That's especially the case when it comes to transit infrastructure, which is key to enabling greater density in an urban region like ours. The board's approach to this infrastructure challenge is consistent with how we've tackled other big issues. Get the right people together, look at what's working across the region and the world, and champion the right solutions. In this next panel, we're going to try to do all three. But before we hear from the panel, we're curious how you'd prioritize what transit projects get built. In the poll question for this session, we're asking you to rank the region's major transit projects on how quickly you'd like to see them get finished. Please go ahead and answer that poll on the right of your screen, just beside our questions tab, and we'll share the results at the end of this session. Now, our next speaker is no stranger to getting things built. I am pleased to welcome Bill Gifford, Senior Vice President of Major Projects at SCC Lavalier. Bill oversees the delivery of infrastructure projects throughout Canada, and his team is currently attached to the Trillium and Confederation LRT lines in Ottawa and the Crosstown LRT here in Toronto. SCC Lavalier also oversees a variety of other transit projects throughout Canada in Vancouver, Calgary, and Edmonton. I can think of no better person to open a discussion on infrastructure. Let's turn to Bill as we begin our next session. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you for those kind words. And thanks to the Toronto Region Board of Trade for hosting this event on such an important and timely subject. SCC Lavalier, as you mentioned, is no stranger to major infrastructure projects. We have a 110-year history of delivering transformative projects that have helped shape communities here in Canada and around the world. In fact, we are partner of 24 of the largest 100 public projects currently under development in Canada. You've mentioned some already, whether that be the Eglinton Crosstown scheme, Montreal's REM and Blue Line extension, Ottawa's Trillium Line, Confederation Line, and Vancouver's Canada Line. Our impact is felt by communities right across Canada. And we are far from done, we hope, aiming to continue to grow our footprint in the years ahead. Now, 60% of the world's population will live in cities by 2030. What's striking about that figure is that it's only 8 years away. Planning and investing in early built solutions now is critical in ensuring that we can deploy infrastructure that is suited for increasing dense, yet net zero emitting populations in time and not years after they're actually required. SCC Lavalier, along with other parts of the infrastructure ecosystem, is uniquely positioned to advocate for what gets built and how it gets built. The engineering construction industry is one of the biggest in the world, but it has been one of the slowest to transform the productivity and has stagnated at times. At SCC Lavalier, we see huge potential to play a leading role in the digital transformation of the industry. For example, by employing digital twin technology, we can transform design solutions with a focus on construction interface, as well as off-site production, manufacture, and assembly. We'll also need to play a role in getting the industry to think about moving to a more circular economy of materials, where there is little or no waste. A great example of this is when we look at our aging infrastructure and reuse of aggregates and raw materials locked within this infrastructure. We must see these materials as valuable assets and use them and ensure they're not processed and disposed of after their use, but assess how their production and usage can be used to best effect and be seen to be part of the solution. In fact, designed, built, and operated right, major infrastructure is an indispensable pillar to decarbonizing our society. Information from the United Nations shows that 130 countries now set or considering to 2050 net zero targets. Canada, in fairness, has set its own targets for 2050 and partial targets for 2030. Meeting these commitments will require us to reimagine infrastructure across all mediums, whether that be rail and transit, roads and highways, local transport, maritime ports and airports. Exciting times ahead. In doing our part for emission reduction, SNC Lavalier is committed to a net zero carbon footprint by 2030. Last year, we published our engineering net zero report in Canada. This blueprint defines the magnitude of the challenge ahead of us and identifies the solutions to resolve these key issues. And in January of this year, we launched our Decarbonomics initiative. It's a data-driven solution for the private and public sectors looking to decarbonize their existing built environment, which contributes currently to 40% of global carbon emissions. All of this in the service of our purpose as an organization, engineering a better future for our planet and our people. So I'd now like to pass the floor to today's moderator, Supriya Dwivedi. Supriya is a well-known face here in Toronto, based political commentator who works as a senior counsel for Enterprise Canada. She's also a freelance contributing journalist for the Star. Supriya, over to you.
Thank you, Bill, for that introduction, and thank you to the Toronto Region Board of Trade for inviting me to moderate this conversation. There aren't exactly a ton of places where transit nerdery is welcomed and encouraged, so I'm very grateful for this safe space the good folks at the board have provided for our esteemed panel of transit experts. First up, we've got Phil Verster, the president and CEO of Metrolinx. Metrolinx is integral to transit development in the region. The agency helps transform transportation through stronger community and customer service and is the connector between many local transit agencies. Next, we have Harut Chitilian, the Vice President of Corporate Affairs, Development and Strategy at the CDBQ. The CDBQ is building the REM project in Montreal, which is an electric and fully automated transit network designed to facilitate mobility across the Greater Montreal region. Also with us is Dr. Carles Casas Esplugas, the Director of Strategic Planning and Perspective at Catalonia's Regional Rail Agency. Barcelona has seen the construction of many different projects over the past several years and are internationally known for delivering infrastructure at very competitive costs. And rounding out our panel is Ben Almond, the CEO of the Engineering, Design and Project Management Division at SNC Lavalier. Ben was the recipient of Canada's Top 40 Under 40 Award and is responsible for leading a 3,000 strong team that drives sustainable, long-term growth across the transportation and development markets. Welcome, everyone. For the members in the audience, please use the Q&A feature to the right to ask questions, and I'll make sure to get to as many of them as I can. And while you fire up some of your questions, I'll start off with a few of my own. Phil, let's start with you. Late last year, Metrolinx hit a major milestone in laying the last section of rail on the Eglinton Crosstown LRT. As that and other builds move closer to completion, what are some of the lessons you've learned that you'll factor into future projects?
So Priya, three things come to mind. And the three things that are relevant here would be firstly to strike that right balance between planning and deciding on transit projects, and then I'll call it energetically delivering those programs. If I give you an example, with Eglinton Crosstown West Extension and Scarborough, we've moved in record time during COVID from the RFQ phase through to handing sites over. I'll give you Scarborough Subway Extension as a good example. Our RFQs went out on the 6th of March, RFQ request for qualification, 6th of March 2020. We completed the RFQ phase, the request for proposals phase, negotiations, and handed the site over to the successful first negotiating proponent on the 5th of March 2021. So just 1 day short of a year during COVID. This is what we need. We sometimes get caught into cycles of consultations and iterations of options, and transit broadly has a very clear trajectory of what a good system looks like, and we should be great and push decisions collectively through local government, provincial government, national government, federal government, and with consultation community. We should just always focus on being good at that. The second one I would say is, if I look at all of our, and you mentioned Eglinton Crosstown, this is about relationships is crucial in this industry. These are complex projects. Complex projects have complex problems. and relationships make a difference. And figuring out that line between what is commercially the right outcome for each organization and maintaining a relationship is really a challenging thing, which we work on very hard with our suppliers in our community. And that needs maturity of management. And that's really important. That is a big factor in success. And the last one is contract forms, Supriya. There are some contract forms which work for some types of projects, like the P3, classic P3 fixed price type contracts have a place. But in complex projects, we are moving very rapidly, complex transit projects, towards more collaborative models where the risk transfer is different and where we as the owner have more skin in the game on risks, and we have more accountability for risks, and we help therefore the supply industry to take on the risks that they are best at managing, and that we manage the risks that we can best manage it. And very often there shouldn't be a dividing line between the two, and the contract form should be more that of an alliance, more that of a construction manager potentially, but more that of a progressive design build. This, getting the contract form right, sets a project up for success. And these are the lessons that we are, all three of these are vigorously part of the Metrolink strategy going forward.
Thank you for that. Harut, you're next up in the hot seat. The REM, as I've mentioned, is a vast rail project that will radically expand connectivity throughout the Montreal region. And it's actually being built at remarkable speed. It's also known for having somewhat of an unusual funding arrangement, including drawing from the development of communities around new stations. Can you tell us a little bit more about how the REM is being delivered, and touch on a little bit more about what makes it so unique?
Thank you, Supriya, and I'm very honored to be on this panel with all the esteemed panelists, and also with a partner that is part of the consortium in delivering the REM. I would like to summarize also in 3 key words what the REM and CDPQ is bringing to the table in the Montreal greater region, and hopefully outside of Montreal going forward. Innovation is key for us. So we've innovated on the funding side by bringing an investment from the pension, which is CDPQ, in funding the project. And with that investment, we've brought predictability to the government. Basically, we've said we'll take development risks, we'll take construction risks, and we'll even take ridership risks in the future. So that protects public entities that are participating in the project. We bring also in this innovating in the procurement phase. Phil was very, very poignant in saying how important it is to go through the different phases. In the past, a lot of projects started in Montreal with design concepts, and they never made it to a development phase. And when they made it to the development phase, the RFQs got stalled, the RFPs got stalled because the prices came in and they were much higher than what expected. So we bought the expertise to manage those processes and to expedite those processes and to transform a concept to a designed project, and the design project to a procurable one, and procurable one to one that's actually getting built. Resiliency is key in this industry also. Phil, a lot of the partners on the panel for sure were hit by COVID, and COVID was an unknown. It's a challenge that challenged us on the construction of this project. But we also encountered some major unknowns during the construction phase, for which we brought a lot of discipline and resiliency. For example, in a tunnel that we're retrofitting to put into use in the REM network, which is 67 kilometers and 26 stations, we found 100-year-old dynamite residue that forced us to completely modify our construction methods to keep the project going forward. And last but not least, every project has to be built by and for the people. So the project was designed initially with an idea in mind, which is to unlock the full potential of development of Montreal and its suburbs. And therefore, we have to have some form of return on investment on this future development. Therefore, we integrated into the financial model of the project a levy that is taken on all new developments that surround the stations. The projected amount of this levy over a 50-year period was $600 million. And only 3 years into construction, we've already taken in $100 million out of that 600. So development is happening fast and furious around the stations, because regardless of the changing methods of people's work in the future, people want to be close to public transit. People want to be in neighborhoods where they can live, they can work, and they can play. So the suburbs will still be there, but also dense, well thought out urban development will be also part of the future picture, as long as it's served by a good transport network.
That's a great answer. Carlos, as I've already mentioned in your intro, your region has an astounding reputation for building lots of new infrastructure at very reasonable costs. Can you tell us a little bit more about Catalonia's transit infrastructure and what we might learn on this side of the ocean, especially when it comes to costs and timelines?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone from Barcelona. Also, it's a pleasure to be here and sharing this panel with all the other experts, and thanks for the invitation. Going to your question, I think that also in Catalonia, we will have examples of all kinds of projects and infrastructures, very successful ones, the ones I'm going to focus on, and not so successful ones. So you probably know, Barcelona, its area, it's quite dense. And I think that we managed to produce some very interesting projects over the last years. I come from a railway company, transit company, that comes from our infrastructure started 150 years ago. So we have a lot of experience also about finding odd things in the tracks as we renew, and grenades from the Civil War and so on, as it was mentioned also before. Surprises are always there. But once we talk about the new big projects and large projects, I wanted to summarize in 4 points what I think that we are trying to apply and that has given us a good results. One is seems obvious, but it's to focus on projects that make sense. Sometimes, yeah, I mean, it's quite obvious, but it's not always that. But when the project makes sense, everything seems to fit better than when those are projects that have not enough support or make no sense from both the transport point of view and also the urban development point of view. Those are two components that we should take into account together, but also know if we're speaking about a transportation project or a urban development project. They are merged and there are connections, but that's also important to be clear on what we're speaking. And when we have lots of pressure, for example, putting lines underground, those are mostly urban integration projects, and they do not benefit the system usually in terms of capacity or something like that. Also, it's important to put projects that work as soon as possible. So to keep that from the project. We had some bad experiences also on having some very large projects, trying to build them all at once. Allowing them to be developed by phases also allows you to learn from the mistakes, even at the construction phase, and you start gaining experience on the operation, and that's proven very, very positive. And then planning ahead a lot is also important in order to work not only on the technical details, which are crucial. Engineering plays an essential role. Devoting time to the project and to all the previous analysis allows you to avoid part of the surprises on the construction phase, but also to have all the public opinion and all the authorities, all the large amount of actors involved on these large projects also align with the project and supporting it. So that's important. And during these periods, what we also are stressing our efforts on now is making the most of the existing infrastructure and the existing projects. That's how we are rushing. Now we have in our central section line trains every 32 trains per hour running on schedule. So that's quite dense. And that's our idea, to push our capacity at maximum, which also helps to make it obvious that we need the new projects, the new capacity, particularly when there is a huge challenge of mobile share. But once the projects are on this phase that are more or less on the planning documents and so on, the last thing that's crucial to deliver them on time and on budget is leadership. Sometimes there's not a very clear accountability or allocation of responsibilities. Projects which have a clear allocation of responsibilities, and there are some companies or technicians or individuals even which take the project as their own project, and they know that they're responsible and they have the capacity also to take action. Okay? Those are the projects that, in our experience, also are delivered in the end better than the projects that have that they are like they have no father, no mother, and no one exactly takes responsibility after a few years. No one remembers why the design solutions that were chosen, which was the reason behind them. So that's another point I think it's also crucial.
Carlos, just really quickly as a follow-up, do you find in your region there's more of a public support generally for large-scale infrastructure projects, simply because there has been consistency in some of what you've just described in terms of the application of these projects?
I'm afraid it depends on the project. I mean, because there's been, unluckily, at some point when there were, depending on the governments in this case, there was an excess of optimism on what could be built. So at some point, drawing lines on a map or on a plan, it's easy, but it comes with a cost. It generates expectations. So the problem is not that people are against a specific project, is that they put that project against another project which they prefer. So sometimes, but once there's a common agreement usually in the projects. The final solutions were not always accepted. That requires a lot of pedagogy and a lot of interaction with the territory. Just to come back from solutions which were too optimistic, like 10, 15 years ago, there's always someone that puts this old plan which was too optimistic on the table. But after that, I think that there's not a big depends on the project. For new rail projects, there's a huge support. We have issues with interurban, long-distance highways. That's more difficult. But that's not for the region because they are seen as passing through projects. And now there's much more opposition to these last projects unless they have an impact also locally, okay? Not just to see the highway go through.
Thanks for that. Ben, SCC Lavalier has worked on many projects around the country and the world. In Canada, in Vancouver, you've got the Canada Line, you have the Eglinton Crossdown here in Toronto, the REM project in Montreal. Can you tell us some of the lessons that were learned from these experiences and how they can be used to improve on future projects?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Supriya. First off, thank you for having me, as a part of this fantastic panel and a great event. As you mentioned, we've had the privilege of working on infrastructure projects around the world, and we're really proud of the impact that we've had as a result of the work. But as they say, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I think I can speak for much of the industry and likely the panel when I say if we want improved outcomes for projects and society, we need to embrace some changes. So I think we'd all agree we want to see more time focused on innovative ways to deliver and less time focused on dispute resolution in the future. And as Phil mentioned, that likely means taking a hard look in the mirror at how we engage contractually. It's no secret we have, as an organization, reached the conclusion that one of the best ways to improve is to adjust how we approach those relationships. There's a time and place for different delivery models, but in order for us to be a success and create success for all parties, including the end users and society, we likely need to take a step back and look at how we align our interests in a different way than we have in the past. And that means embracing this collaborative delivery model and seeing that as a big step forward for us in how we work here in Canada. By collaborative, I mean, different teams with different contracts working on projects and collaborating towards successful delivery, putting that emphasis on partnerships that require collaboration, transparency, and collective management of risk. And I think all of this, as Phil mentioned, takes us down a path where we start to unlock the real power of what this industry has to offer. It releases some of that embedded time, focus, and energy to allow us to focus on longer term objectives of our clients. So not simply getting a rail line in service, but helping our clients and the communities progress on their own long-term goals towards ESG goals, objectives, et cetera. So we shift our energy towards integrating sustainability-based solutions, leveraging low-carbon engineering experience to decarbonize projects and look at the existing built environment portfolios for opportunity as well, engaging the circular economy with other projects and initiatives in the area so we can raise our collective game for the good of the community. To sort of wrap it up, we think that a change in how we engage with each other along with embracing digital tools and sustainable solutions, are going to take our projects to another level across this country. And that means we can hit not only short-term targets in terms of delivering on the specific pieces of work, but also achieving long-term aspirations for the community, like resiliency and smarter development, more intelligent development and mobility solutions.
Great. Phil, one thing I wanted to ask you, just, given the fact that we are here in the GTA, what are some of the tools that Metrolinx has employed to ensure that consensus gets built around some of these projects? I know that's something that the entire panel can likely weigh in on, but in particular to, some of the projects that Metrolinx has undertaken.
Yes, Supriya, the type of things that are really important in these projects that sort of set the project up for success is to what extent you succeed to get the project concept defined, as Carlos was saying, as Ben was saying, to what extent you create that collaborative behavior around it, and to what extent you actually get the points across of what the business case really is. Lines on a map is easy, again, as Carl said, but the real essence is how you get across the economic benefit, and you have that tension between how it's going to affect people locally in terms of where the line is built. Is it built under my house? Is it built in a overground line behind my house? You've got those types of tensions which require very careful personal consultation with the community and careful management. And then you have the bigger impact of what are the benefits, economic benefits that a complex project like that brings. And Supriya, there's a saying in transit projects that works something like this: says if you've done one transit project, you have done one transit project. There's no such thing as one transit project describes all projects. The complexities of each project, the requirements from you on each project as an organization just differs. Sometimes it's all about the complexity of the technical integration. Sometimes it's about how you consult with the communities on very sensitive decisions. It varies, and this is what makes these projects so exciting, but it's also what makes these projects sometimes really big set pieces, especially when you build them right in the heart of a developed city. It just makes the level of energy that needs to go into these projects 2 or 3 times higher.
Ben, you were nodding along. Did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, I can't echo Phil's sentiment around, one transit project of experience is in fact one transit project of experience. Yeah. Anywhere you go in the world, the community implications, the amount of shared risk when you travel through different interests, different backgrounds, put us in an awkward situation because we benchmark ourselves against the last successful project. And I think I will say this, my other esteemed panelists, I feel like this group has done a good job of this, but we have to be very sensitive to ensuring that we all align ourselves towards the same outcomes. And I think where we've gotten into trouble in the past is when we've become very focused on maybe our own objectives and not the overall objectives of projects, pursuits, and overall programs. And we have an opportunity as a group to set our feet forward in a different way than we have in the past. And proud to see this group endeavoring on that path. Because once everyone involved in the supply chain is focused on those aligned outcomes and they're the same across the board, I actually think we can do a great job of achieving those things.
I think, Supriya, if I could add to that, the interesting thing about these projects are we think of that as projects, and a project as sort of a mental picture of an activity that happens. But if I look at our very competent supply chain, whether it's the CTS team on Eglinton Crosstown or our Mobilinx team that's delivering her Ontario LRT, or the Mosaic team that's delivering Finch West LRT, these are billion-dollar businesses that work for us. Those projects are worth $1 billion. It's a multi-year billion-dollar company that literally works as a consortium for us. So when you think of it like that, this is a very complicated, complex, suitably, that's how it should be, commercial structure. It's an organization with people that just want to do their very best. And so when Ben says it as eloquently as he says about alignment between the organizations, that is where the success lies. And alignment means you need to focus on alignment on operations, you need to focus on how you deliver it, and at the same time, you must be able to have difficult conversations on commercial issues as well. And this requires skills and expertise, which is not always in available or ready supply. And in a post-COVID world, this is all becoming slightly more challenging as well. But this is it. If all of us are working on the same sort of mental frame of collaborating and finding a common alignment, all of these things can be done.
We're getting some audience questions now, so I'm going to move on to those while we sort of move the conversation along. Carlos, the first question is for you. In Toronto, we have different fares for each municipality. The question is, how do you handle fares in Catalonia?
Yeah, that's a good question in the sense that making sense to the projects and what was being said before of this alignment of both operation and how the projects embed themselves in an ecosystem on the region. It's essential on how then we are able to deliver to the public in the end, and that's through the fare system and the access system. In Barcelona region, since 2000, we have a fully integrated system. That means that all transit, all public transport, all main public transport systems are integrated. It's a zone-based system, very, very simple in the end, but with the same ticket, you can travel all around the city with all modes integrated: railway, tram, bus, suburban bus, buses on neighboring cities are also integrated. Now we are moving to a contactless system, and the idea is also which is being complicated because public does not see the benefit. Because with the former 20-year-old magnetic tickets, we already have everything integrated, so it's going to be complicated to make people change. That's something. But the benefit, the long-term idea is to move to a distance and origin-destination-based system because zones always have boundaries and difficulties. So the idea is that from point A, point B, the fare will be one, always the same. Either you take 3 systems or just one system or whatever is the trip you are doing. And that's what we are aiming to. So having this integration, not just on Barcelona metropolitan area, but extending that also to all the Catalonia region, which is like a couple of million of people more than the 5 million living in Barcelona area now covered by this system. So, but that's been a huge success. I mean, on terms of accessibility and making the system. The challenge now is to integrate on these systems and these new tickets all the last mile mobility systems and all the scooters, rental bikes, which are being really a success here in Barcelona as a Mediterranean city. So people are getting rid of their property bikes and just using these shared bikes or shared mobility. Integrating all these modes into the system is the next challenge, but that's going to be made through this support.
Harut, I wanted to ask you, given that your background is somewhat interesting, that you were a Montreal councillor, a city councillor before you're joining the CDPQ, were there any lessons that you learned in your time in political life that you brought over into your role at the CDPQ?
Definitely. And I think it allows me, first and foremost, to be a translator because sometimes project delivering organizations and communities, and especially community representatives, don't speak the same language. It's English at the end of the day, but it's not the same English. And one of the barriers that we need to unlock when delivering projects of this magnitude is where do we draw the line in terms of urban development around the infrastructure. So communities have an expectation that the transit project should also solve all of the urban issues in the areas that is being built in. And therefore they start with a very high expectation that pedestrian crossing near the future station that was unsafe needs to be secured, that the non-existent bike path that leads to the station needs to be built by the transit delivering project. So all of these issues are very complex because you have to go really on a micro level and determine which ones are basically, at the end of the day, critical for the success of the project. But it's also okay to say to a municipality or a community that some of these demands do not basically meet the criterias of the project, because at the end of the day, there's major infrastructure, transit, development, delivery, and operation kind of entity, but there's also a city and a local government that has to meet its own responsibilities. So these touch points are very, very key, and managing them is almost a 7-day-a-week job. And the second issue is a lot of these projects provoke a lot of impact on the communities. So these impacts range from dust, noise, and vibrations, but sometimes they impact in a sustainable way people's lives, such as shutting down existing lines to improve them, making detours on roads that change people's lives, or coming and setting up a construction site next to a primary school. So a lot of these issues have to be handled with a very deft touch, because a lot of the project delivering organizations are driven by KPIs, results, deadlines, commercial issues, while on the other hand, you have kids playing in a schoolyard, and that need to be taken into consideration while building this project. So that's what I've brought to our team, basically acting sometimes as a mediator, sometimes as a translator, and most of the time as a problem solver for these issues to keep these projects going, but also to keep the communities engaged and happy about the whole adventure.
The next question is for the group, so anyone can feel free to sort of take this. Consultations with local communities are so important for infrastructure projects. I think we'd all agree with that. But factoring in too much input might drive up costs and extend timelines. How do you draw the line between meaningfully listening and getting things built? Phil, I'm going to start with you because you're reaching for the unmute button. Yeah,
I think that's a good one for us to take on, and this is really important to position this concept right of consultation, and I think there are different ways different agencies and different levels of government consult, and I'll just make the distinction between two, and we come across this very often. How we operate Metrolinx, and it's the way I understand why we are delivering so much of the infrastructure is because we operate in a way where we put detailed transit business cases together, we identify the best transit solution, and then we consult on how to mitigate the impacts of that and how to implement. We consult on how to implement the best transit solution. And we get to a point of understanding what the best transit solution looks like based on transit technical decision-making and consultation with planning authorities and all of the items that Harut referred to, which are all crucial to getting to an understanding of how your transit solution affects the economy of where you build the line. I can show you on all of our subway developments, we take great care to make sure that city planning and developments are maximized by what we do. Then there's another way to consult with communities. You develop the 3 transit options and you ask the community which one they want. That's a different way, and that doesn't necessarily end up with an optimal transit solution. That ends up with a solution that can be a transit solution that has compromises built in which are localized without taking the overall bigger picture into consideration. Clearly, each of the 2 ways of consultation have its own benefits in terms of how it interfaces with our fantastic democratic society and how local government works, provincial government works, and federal government works. The model Metrolinx works under is where we have to do the tough decision. What is the right transit solution and best transit solution? Once we've got that understood, we consult on how to implement it. That means the degrees of freedom to adjust some of your choices are potentially less. That makes the conversation potentially more difficult. That leads to people feeling you're not always listening. but we are listening. We just can't always adjust, but we adjust. We still find ways to adjust. We build noise barriers where it's required. We have community benefit programs, the stuff Arut was talking about. We are enlarging paquets, where we buy properties, and then afterwards we try to turn the properties into value for those communities, and community supports. This is challenging. This is really challenging, but there's a trade-off in terms of how you consult and how you think about this solution that we're putting in place is here for the next 150 years, at least. So for the next 150 years, you have to come up with that solution that has the biggest impact on society in the full sense of the word: economic, wealth, transit, all of the contributions transit makes.
Great.
So maybe
yeah, go ahead, Ben.
Oh yeah, so sorry, Supriya. Maybe a follow-up question for you and the rest of the panelists here. We talk a lot about transparency in decision making and helping people see through those decisions. Can you talk a little bit about how important it is to be transparent in that decision making, share, the cost benefit sort of evaluation of those decisions? Because at the end of the day, I think we would all agree that, as much as we're building transit solutions, we're actually giving people time back in their day, time with their families, all of those things, right? But these day-to-day decisions are high emotion. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on transparency and how you balance the cost versus the benefit.
So one of the things we have done and do regularly now is when we make really difficult decisions, and I'll point to some. We've got a fantastic project with the Young North Subway extension, and we work closely with communities and with the leadership, elected leaders across the whole width and breadth of the spectrum. The thing is, people ask questions, and in the world we are in today, there are many ways which groups mobilize or opinions get mobilized, which perhaps don't always reflect the actions taken and decisions made. And the facts are sometimes sort of presented in ways which is not always recognizable, but by everyone. This is just the world we're in. What we have adopted is a practice whereby, I personally work with our teams and we write open letters, and we print those open letters on our website and say, look, this is how this decision was made. These were the facts. This is what we considered. We also publish our business cases. We look at business cases, they're like 68 page, 680 pages, however many. And these are bulky, difficult documents. But if you publish your decisions and now you make it on a 10-page, you're easily readable on the 10 biggest decisions. I do think that's the type of way to communicate. We're constantly looking for more ways to communicate and be transparent and concise and relevant in terms of how we communicate. We are obviously in a world which competes for people's attention, but being there with a published document helps, I think.
Yeah, in that sense, it's tough to get the right information at the right time to the right people. People always feel that they are informed too late and that they weren't given the chance or the floor, and they think you already decided. But we are also making an effort of being very transparent on our big projects with the cost-benefit analysis. We publish them afterwards. They are also part of the decision-taking process and so on. But it's difficult to get to the individuals to get broader pictures. I think that's a sign also. It depends on the maturity of the societies and the communities, how used they are on taking this responsibility and analyzing, because it's difficult to move from the individual effects of that infrastructure to the global benefits for the society. That requires an effort, and that's part of this cultural transformation change that I think it's in place in most of our societies, this core responsibility, and we have to move forward to that. But also, I think it's important that when we set the consultation process and so on, the rules are established clear from the beginning in order not to make them last forever, and also to focus the discussion. Because what we found is that when we start discussing about a specific project, that all the people that participate want to solve things that are not really linked to that project, or want the project also to solve things that are not exactly that. And we get then these aberrant solutions of projects that should have been two different projects, and then they try to mix everything in one line, which is not really fulfilling either one or the other target. And that's very difficult also. And in that sense also of being, having a process in advance and making sure that everyone that is really involved in the decision, but to the extent that they can. What we find here in Barcelona in most of the consultation processes is that there is a lack of representativity from the community on the groups that are actually participating, because you need time, you need also the will, maybe. So they are quite biased towards people that have time. That means students and retired people. And then groups of interest that tend to manipulate the result of the consultation. And that's also very important. So, and they are driven by economic interests, and they have enough capacity to manipulate these kind of neighborhood assemblies and these kind of things. So that's very complicated. In that sense, I think also we can learn from the French experience. For the very large projects, they have this public consultation, but for very large projects, which they are driven by they are organized, and there's like a person that's going to make the final report. So is the one taking responsibility of hearing really all the different opinions and making appointments with all groups of opinion, not just the ones that are making more noise or whatever, public representatives, but also civil society, etc. And tries to merge everything in a report, finally taking all this point. And it has a timeline, and I think there are quite good things of this French experience for very large projects, the public consultation process they have.
So, Priya, if I could just add to what Carl is saying there. A consultation process has its sort of quirks and its things that happen with it. I gotta say, it is so important for every project because there are just really good people out there, really fantastic communities, and these communities are affected by it. So I find that the consultation process makes our projects better, and we end up with better outcomes. And it's a very valuable part of the process.
You unmuted yourself, so I just wanted to see if you wanted to get in there really quickly.
Yes, just food for thought, because transparency is key, community engagement, consultation is key also. But at one point, I think I won't have the answer to that question today. These projects are also becoming very acutely covered by media, and projects of this magnitude, massive infrastructure projects, do not have the same biorhythm as everyday news. You cannot churn out news and content on an everyday basis. But that's the expectation that is being driven by the community and by somewhat also by the media, because they need to know on a daily basis what's happening. So adapting the rhythm of communicating with the community is also a key component, and there has to be a balance, because a project of this magnitude cannot have updates every 24 hours. So there has to be key milestones, there has to be community engagement, transparency at all levels, but there also has to be a balance. What that balance is needs to be determined, because in our case with the REM, it's a project that is covered as much as the Montreal Canadiens. We have the same level of notoriety, and sometimes handling the flow of media requests that are by the tens almost every day, it is a task of its own too, and there has to be a balance. And at this point right now, we don't know what that balance is, because people want to know, people are very aware of their surroundings, and it's something that we have to work on going forward to find that right balance of transparency, communications, but also keeping the project on its milestones.
Well, gentlemen, the time has absolutely flown by for us. Thank you to Phil, Harut, Carlos, and Ben for bringing your insights and taking questions from our audience. I will now invite the board's Vice President of Policy, the very lovely and brilliant Roselle Martino, to close out this session and introduce our next keynote speaker. Over to you, Roselle.
Thanks very much, Supriya. I would just like to also echo your gratitude to the panelists. I really appreciated the candor of the conversation here. We heard about consultation, community engagement, transparency, decision-making. This is an ecosystem. We're not individual, or we're multiple ecosystems within one big ecosystem. We heard about that. But one key takeaway also was the importance of collaboration and common alignment. So I think all of these things are key factors as we look at major infrastructure projects or major transit projects in our region and beyond. So again, thank you all so much for your contributions, and of course, Supriya, for honing in on those questions and stitching together the really salient points that every one of our panelists made. So thank you again, Supriya, for the excellent moderation. Now, I know many members of this panel are interested in how the audience ranked their desire to see major transit projects get finished. So let's take a look at their response. If they can, that should be coming up on your screen shortly. Okay, so what we see here looks like the prioritization here. We have the Ontario line subway, it seems to be first, followed by GO expansion, Eglinton Crosstown LRT extension, Yonge North subway extension. That impacts me, so I would have put that higher up in terms of where I live. And of course, the Scarborough subway extension. So that's the order of operation. But again, I think if you had done some detailed consultations and community engagement, as was talked about just before we close this session, that might range, right? That might vary depending on how that's prioritized. So, but again, great conversation, and thanks very much, everyone, for participating.
And Roselle, all of those are happening. They are happening, and they are all moving forward at speed.
Yeah, and Phil, that's a great segue, because there is what is absolutely clear, and I say this, quite emphatically. There is a strong desire to build transit across the region, right? There's strong support for it. There's a strong desire from communities, from partners across the region, and there's many projects that are not listed here. That will support a more connected regional transit network. So glad to hear those are all underway, and there's many more as well.